Hey everybody, this is Perch. We've heard a couple people when we've done interviews talk about the likely future where there's more graphic novels, more OGNs, more you know bigger content not put out monthly and put out more places. We've heard several creators that we've interviewed mention this, and this has been something that what's odd is for about I don't know, let's say about 2007, maybe that's too far back, but right about 2007, I think that was when I was at um, San Diego Comic Con. But from about then to about 2014, roughly, digital was going to save us all. Digital was the future. Comics are going digital, and by 2014, 2015, it would be all digital, and the print would be dead. Print is dying. They told us, and that obviously didn't happen in the U.S. And then what started around 2014, 2015 is kind of the newer comment, which is what we've heard in some interviews, which is, well, things are going to go OGN. Things are going to go to graphic novels and this idea of monthly periodicals, monthly comics. It's a legacy, it's a dinosaur, and that's going to go away. Um, what's interesting is I don't think that's a far-fetched, crazy idea. I think the people who say that, I don't think they're saying things that are baffling. I think with digital, there was a little bit of just kind of hope in there. The technology was nowhere near the place in the U.S. around 2008, 2009, where that would have worked. Comic readers were not rich, wealthy early adopters of tech. So that idea was always kind of off. And what's funny is because there was so much push for, well, digital's going to save it, digital's going to do it, that when we got to the point where digital might have had a bigger impact, say around 2016, 2017, when tablets are starting to get more frequent, people are getting nicer phones that they could actually, in theory, read stuff on. By then, the market, the industry, was kind of had soured on the idea of digital. They came so early that when people start bringing up digital around 2016 in the US, people are like, yeah, we've heard that before, not interested. And you look at Amazon, a company that, I mean, reasonably should be able to make that work. And through their acquisition of Comixology, they really haven't. I mean, the most recent attempt has been through the relationship with Scott Snyder, and they've sold some books, but it hasn't done what people hoped. I think the books Snyder has done are reasonable. They've got good talent on them. There's nothing wrong with them. You read them, they're engaging, but the platform it needs a big kick. It needs a big spark. And what I think we've seen with the Scott Snyder announcement is that big spark is not going to come from creators. It has to be actually something else. It has to be a different delivery model. It has to be a story that really catches. But it's digital is far off. So now we go to OGN. Uh, why is First off, do I think that that's what's going to happen? I don't. And I'll explain why. I don't think it's because it's necessarily a bad idea. I do think that, you can see creators kind of moving into this format. I think on the indie scene and with smaller projects or with projects that are not the big two of comics, I think you'll see people migrate there. I think Rick Remender, as one example, Ed Brubaker, they naturally would do better in that format. I think that is very, very true. However, I think that Marvel and DC are going to really struggle with that format, and the reason being is they don't have the killer talent. And by the way, some of you may radically disagree with this, but they don't have the talent to move the industry. They have trained the direct market, but more importantly, because I think if if there was just good organization to how these books were put out and how they were sold and how they were managed, I think it wouldn't be bad for the comic shop. In fact, there's an argument it might be better if you had far fewer monthly comics, assortment of OGNs that were coming out on a regular basis. But one, these companies have shown a complete inability to organize and put things out in a structured way. And two, there's not the big names that can move a bunch of audiences into that picture. Now, again, notice what just happened with Comixology. You have Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, who, for a period of time, certainly with Batman and the New 52, and then a little bit, later with Death Metal, those two were the biggest team in comics. You could argue that today, Donny Cates, Ryan Stegman would be a similar kind of pairing team. But who's bigger as a two-person combo in the big two? Who's got a bigger rep than those? You would think you put Snyder and Capullo on something, it's a home run. It's going to sell amazing. You put Cates and Stegman on something, it's going to sell amazing. But you're not seeing that groundswell of interest. You're not seeing people move based on that. And so this idea of, well, we're going to move to OGNs, and that's somehow going to replicate the market, that's somehow going to move the customers to want to do the same, to want to consume in that way. It's not happening. It didn't happen in digital. I mean, again, we have a Snyder Capullo product, a new comic from the two of them over on Comixology, and it's been okay, but it hasn't transformed the industry like you might expect with those names attached to it. By the way, this isn't a knock on Snyder or Capullo at all. They're still very talented individuals. The books are reviewed highly. Nothing wrong with it. It's just the thing that we're looking for a dramatic shift in the industry away from printed monthly comics is we're looking for some spark, some moment, something that's going to actually, where you see consumers go, yeah, I'll go for that. I'll give you an example. Years ago, when people used to go to Blockbuster Video or Hollywood Video or places like that, and they used to rent the tapes and they'd have to deliver them back and all the rest. And you saw Netflix come around with get the movie in the mail, and that's either before the streaming service. It was literally get the movie in the mail, and then they got digital. People moved to that rather quickly. The end of Blockbuster happened pretty fast. Similarly, people would go in and buy CDs and consume them that way. But when you had Apple Music and other things, people moved. It was more convenient. It was better. It was a trigger. But notice with that move to digital, it wasn't like whatever I don't know what band at the time, but it wasn't like there's a, oh God, am I really going to pick Taylor Swift? I'll pick for God's sake, I'll pick terrible Taylor Swift. I mean, it wasn't like an artist who was very popular. Kanye West said, I'm going to put my music out in digital only and forget the physical. And the customers are like, okay, that's the trigger. I'm going to move with it. It wasn't that. It was the convenience of the platform. So with digital, it isn't convenient. I did those reviews of X-Men Green. Marvel Unlimited still pretty much sucks. It feels like something that was developed back in 2010. It doesn't feel like a modern product. And frankly, Comixology doesn't either. Neither one of them feels like a good way to read and consume comics. With OGNs, if you're going to put out books that way for the big two, what's the book? What's the creative team? What's the method where that actually feels like a better plan? Because right now, what you're telling customers in short is, hey, rather than pay $4.99 for a comic, which probably is too much, how about you spend $12.99 for a comic, and we'll deliver 2 of those a year for you? You'll be saving money, right? That's not how customers are going to look at it. They're going to look at it of like, wait, you want me to pay more and ship it less? Because love it, hate it, or whether it's a trap or not, customers like getting these stories every month. If they could, they'd want them more frequently than that. They don't like waiting. Ron Mars made the comment that a lot of these people, you look at something like Netflix where it's all you can eat and you can just hey, the new season is on and you can just watch the whole thing all in one night if you want to. Don't sleep and show up to work all crappy the next day. Disney Plus is when they launch a new series, you get 1 episode a week, and that's how they do it. That's how HBO Max does it. That's how Apple TV does it. And so you have those two kind of systems battling it out. And so the argument was, well, people don't like waiting every month for a comic. The problem with the OGN model is that there's not enough powerful stories out there to have a Spider-Man OGN, for example, and say, okay, this story is impressive and you're going to be okay waiting 6 months for the next chapter in this story. Nobody's going to want to do that. And when you throw out a more expensive price tag on it, that's not going to work either. So like I said, this will work for indie comics. This will work for things that do not have the history of serialized storytelling. But when I talk to some creators, they give me the impression of like they understand this. That's my counter argument. I don't think OGNs are going to take over everything. And the counter, and for this reason, that you have Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and Justice League and X-Men and all these other characters, where customers are used to cliffhangers and stories that continue. Many customers are annoyed at done-in-one stories because they don't feel consequential. The response I get back more often than not is, well, maybe it's time for people to give up on Spider-Man, Batman, X-Men, and these properties. Maybe it's time for customers to let those go and, move on to indie comics. Yeah, people aren't going to do that. Turns out they still like those characters. Spider-Man, Batman still sells well. If you had an X-Men comic that wasn't about them having dinner, I mean, that would sell much better too. Again, people point to manga, and this is one of the more baffling ones, where they're like, well, look at the success of manga. The success of manga proves the OGN format, except not really. Because manga isn't done in OGN format. That's just what you're getting here in the US. A lot of these comics are coming out bi-weekly. Sometimes weekly, but oftentimes every other week there's a new chapter out. They're shorter than what our monthly comics look like, but that's how manga is. When you get it here in the US and you get a little, graphic novel, it's not an original graphic novel, it's a collection of those stories that were coming out. It's working for a lot of people in the US because there's this huge backlog of material, so they're able to go in and buy a book and go in the next week and buy another book and all the rest. But when people, you experience this when you catch up, when you get to the most current tankobon graphic novel, you find yourself really frustrated having to wait 4 to 6 months to get the next one. It sucks. So a lot of people then immediately flip to digital where they can read it faster. But the point is, the content is being produced faster. In the US, if we move to an OGN format for the mainstream big two characters, it's not going to work. You can't have a 160-page Spider-Man story, and it wouldn't. And let's not kid ourselves, it wouldn't be anywhere close to that long. You're lucky if we get to 60. And then basically, in that on a cliffhanger of some kind and say, we'll see you in 6 months for another 60 pages. It won't work. That's just taking serialized storytelling and slowing it way down. Love it or hate it, US comic books are stuck in this monthly model. And if anything, the customers would like it faster than monthly. That's where it's currently at. If you're going to move from that, you got to provide some incredible value. And that's why I went into the creators, like, you would have to have, you'd have to say, hey, we're going to stop publishing Spider-Man and monthly. And in exchange, we're going to publish, 120 pages every 6 months. And it's going to be $12. And, it's Todd McFarlane is going to draw it. That might work. Might. But even then, I think customers would be disappointed by, it's like, oh, I love this comic, and wait a minute, I'm going to see you again in 6 months. That doesn't fit. That's the fundamental problem with this model. Again, this will work great for the indies, where you do not have a history of serialized storytelling, where a creator can come in and tell something with a beginning, middle, and end. But the big two comics don't have beginning, or they have beginning, but they don't have middles and ends. They just have beginning and then keep going. If you're going to shift it into an OGN model, you're going to leave a ton of money on the table. And I think a lot of creators are maybe misunderstanding how exciting their OGN stories are. If you suddenly say cancel the monthly Spider-Man book and replaced it with OGNs, where it's like, and in this episode, Spider-Man needs to pick up his laundry, and there's a lost cat, and man, he has a tough day doing it. Yeah, you're gonna triple the price. You're going to slow down the release, and you're going to give people that. That's not going to work. So, again, I think that we may be in a model where you see indies go to the OGN format. The big two, frankly, what the big two need to do more than anything else is get your operational house in order. Get it to the point where you're able to release stuff consistently, reliably, with consistent creative teams, where people understand where you're going and it doesn't look like a bunch of interns are just effing around. Do that. That's what the big two need to focus on. Try and figure out how to get the price point down. Try and figure out how to make it more reliable. Try and just have some stories that can get some momentum, and leave the OGNs to the indies. If you would like to, as a big tooth, dip your toe in the water by doing, bring back the annual and have it just be much bigger and a complete story, but you have to bring some money and some creative talent behind it. If you don't do those things, I mean, forget it. People won't go. The attention span is too short. And this is not like Netflix where, I mean, one of the big fallacies that comics has, they continuously like to compare themselves to games and to movies. And it's like, okay, so if you're comparing yourself to a game that may have 40, 60 hours of gameplay, do you realize how many comics that is? Here's a clue, a lot. If you're going to compare yourself to a Netflix series that has like 10 episodes at an hour each, okay, you're comparing yourself to 10 hours of entertainment that costs hundreds of millions of dollars to make in some cases. The budgets on some of these are huge. And you're telling me you're going to compete with that? You're not. People don't look at it that way. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the progression into OGN, progression to digital, or then tell me if this stuff, does my argument make any sense, or am I just babbling crazily? Thanks for listening.